If you had asked me at 16 what racism looked like, I would have given you the same answer most people would. Someone yelling slurs. A Confederate flag hanging from a pickup truck. A teacher openly treating students differently because of their skin color. I thought racism had to be obvious. Loud, visible, easy to recognize. I was wrong. The most racist thing I ever experienced wasn't written on a sign. Nobody ever said it out loud. There wasn't a single rule that mentioned race. In fact, if you read the student handbook, everything sounded completely fair. That's what made it so dangerous. My name is Marcus Williams, and this happened during my junior year at Jefferson High School in Texas. I had just moved from Chicago after my mom accepted a nursing position at Baylor Medical Center. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Back in Chicago, my dad had passed away 2 years earlier from cancer, and my mom wanted a new beginning somewhere warmer, somewhere with better opportunities. I didn't argue. I wasn't exactly leaving much behind. Jefferson High looked like something straight out of a movie, a football stadium bigger than some colleges, new science labs, an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Huge banners hanging from the ceiling celebrating state championships. When I walked in on my first day, I actually thought, maybe this place will be different. The principal gave a speech about diversity, about respect, about equality. Every hallway had posters saying things like, every student belongs. Different backgrounds, one family. It sounded perfect, too perfect. The first week went by without any problems. Teachers were friendly. Students mostly kept to themselves. I made a couple of acquaintances. One was Diego Ramirez, whose locker happened to be next to mine. He was funny, sarcastic, the kind of guy who could make even chemistry class entertaining. Another was Sarah Collins, one of the smartest people I'd ever met. She spent lunch reading Supreme Court cases for fun. Yes, she was that kind of person. Everything seemed normal until the second week. It started in AP US history. I had transferred with excellent grades, straight A's, advanced classes, teacher recommendations. My counselor back in Chicago even wrote that I should continue taking AP courses because I was already preparing for college scholarships. But when I checked my schedule, there wasn't a single AP class, not one. Instead, I was placed into regular history, regular English, regular science. At first, I assumed it was just a paperwork mistake. So after class, I visited the guidance office. The counselor smiled politely. "Oh, Marcus, yes, I remember your file. I think there was a mistake," I said. "My transcript shows I qualified for AP history." She looked at her computer. "You absolutely qualify academically," I smiled. "Great," then she frowned, "but there are additional placement considerations." "What kind?" She hesitated. "Administrative guidelines." That wasn't an answer, so. "Can I switch?" "I'm sorry, not at this time." That was it. No explanation, no reason, just, no. I walked out confused more than angry. Maybe classes were full. Maybe transfers had to wait until next semester. It wasn't a huge deal, or at least, that's what I told myself. Later that day I mentioned it to Diego during lunch. He laughed, not because it was funny, because he'd heard the story before. "What?" I asked. "You got hit with the compatibility rule." "The what?" He shrugged. "You'll learn." I waited for him to explain. Instead, he changed the subject. That bothered me. People only avoid talking about something when they're afraid of it. Over the next month, I started paying attention. Patterns began appearing everywhere. Every honors classroom I passed. Almost everyone inside was white. Sometimes there were Asian students, occasionally one Hispanic student. Almost never black students. Meanwhile, my regular classes looked completely different, mostly black, mostly Hispanic, a few white students. At first I thought maybe I was imagining things. Confirmation bias. Our brains are good at finding patterns that don't actually exist, so I stopped guessing. I started counting. Every day during passing period, I'd walk by the AP hallway and quietly keep track. After 2 weeks. The numbers shocked me. Out of roughly 200 students I counted, only 7 were black. Jefferson High's student population was nearly 30% black. That didn't make sense. One afternoon I asked Sarah about it. She looked around before answering. "You noticed too, so I'm not crazy?" "No." "Then why is it like that?" She sighed. "No one knows officially." "What do you mean? There are rumors." "What rumors?" "That guidance counselors decide who's a good fit." "A good fit," she nodded. "They never say what that means." The words stuck with me. Good fit. Fit for what? Learning, taking tests, reading books. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The following Monday, I requested another meeting with my counselor. This time I brought everything. My transcript, recommendation letters, SAT practice scores, certificates from academic competitions. She looked genuinely impressed. "Marcus, you're an excellent student." "Then why can't I enroll in AP history?" Silence. She opened a folder, closed it, looked toward the office window. Finally she whispered, "Off the record." I nodded. "I don't make these decisions." "Who does?" "The placement committee." "Who's on the committee?" "I can't say." "Why?" She lowered her voice even further. "Because I like my job." That sentence hit harder than anything else she'd said. People don't fear losing their jobs over ordinary school schedules. There had to be something bigger. As I stood to leave, she quietly slid a yellow form across the desk. I wasn't supposed to give you this. It was titled, Advanced Placement Transfer Request. At the bottom, in tiny print, one sentence caught my eye. Administrative approval may consider community compatibility when determining final placement. Community compatibility. I read it again, and again. The phrase sounded harmless, almost friendly, but the more I thought about it, the stranger it became. What exactly was community compatibility? How do you measure something like that? There was no definition, no checklist, no explanation, just those two words. That night I showed the form to my mom. She frowned immediately. What does this even mean? I have no idea. She grabbed her laptop and searched the district website. Nothing, no explanation anywhere. The next morning she called the school. They told her exactly what they'd told me. It is part of our placement review process. She asked for the written policy. They promised to email it. They never did. Over the next few weeks, I noticed something else. Whenever students talked about AP classes, black students always assumed they wouldn't get in, not because of grades, because they'd already been told no before. Almost like everyone had accepted it, like it was normal. That's the scary thing about unfair systems. If they exist long enough, people stop questioning them. One Friday afternoon, Diego looked at me and said something I'll never forget. You know why nobody fights it? Why? Because every year they reject just enough students to make everyone think it's personal, instead of realizing it's a pattern. I stared at him. He continued quietly, my cousin had a 4. They told him he wasn't the right fit. He believed them. He joined the army after graduation. He still thinks he just wasn't smart enough. Diego looked down at his lunch tray. They made him doubt himself. And for the first time since arriving at Jefferson High, I realized this wasn't just about class schedules. Someone had created a system where qualified students blamed themselves. Instead of questioning the system, I went home that night unable to sleep. I spread every document across my bedroom floor, the transfer form, my transcript, the student handbook, every piece of paper I could find somewhere. There had to be an answer. I just didn't know. That finding it would eventually put me, my family, and Jefferson High School at the center of one of the biggest education scandals our town had ever seen. That weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about those two words, community compatibility. The phrase sounded so ordinary, yet somehow it controlled who got opportunities and who didn't. Monday morning, I walked into school with one goal. I needed proof. Not rumors, not opinions, proof. During lunch, I found Sarah sitting alone in the library. She looked up from her laptop before I even spoke. You've been thinking about it all weekend, haven't you? I laughed. Was it that obvious? You have that face. What face? The one people make when they're about to get themselves into trouble. She closed her laptop. So, what's the plan? I placed the yellow placement form on the table. I want to know where this rule came from. Sarah studied it carefully, then she smiled. I might know where to start. Jefferson High had one thing almost nobody knew about. An archive room, not the regular library. A locked storage room in the basement that held decades of old yearbooks, student handbooks, meeting minutes, and district records. Sarah volunteered in the library after school, which meant she had access. Tuesday afternoon, we walked downstairs carrying boxes like we actually belonged there. The basement smelled like dust and old paper. Rows of gray filing cabinets stretched across the room. Some hadn't been opened in years. This is where schools hide history, Sarah joked. I wasn't laughing. For the next 2 hours we searched old student handbooks. Nothing, same vague sentence, community compatibility. Then Sarah reached for an older handbook. She froze. Marcus, what? You need to see this. I grabbed the book. The rule wasn't the same. It read, students entering advanced academic programs may be evaluated based on cultural compatibility with established learning environments. I blinked. Cultural compatibility? Sarah nodded slowly. Someone changed the wording. We kept digging. Every older handbook used the phrase, cultural compatibility. Around 2013, it suddenly changed to community compatibility. Different words, same initials, same rule. Someone had rewritten it, not removed it. The next day Sarah made copies before returning the books. She whispered, if this ever disappears, we'll still have evidence. That afternoon I showed Diego. His expression changed instantly. My older brother graduated in 2011. He remembers that phrase. What did it mean? He said nobody knew, but everyone understood. Understood what? Diego looked around the hallway. If you weren't white, you probably weren't getting into honors unless you were absolutely impossible to reject. The words made my stomach tighten. Later that week, our history teacher assigned a project about local government transparency. Most students groaned. Sarah looked at me with a grin. This is perfect. What are you thinking? Public records. Texas law allowed citizens to request certain school district documents, meeting minutes, policy discussions. Archived memos if the rule had ever been discussed publicly. There might be a record, so we submitted a request. Neither of us expected much. A week later, the district emailed back. Most documents were unavailable. Others had been destroyed according to retention policy. But one attachment remained, a scanned school board meeting agenda from 2012, just 3 pages, most of it discussed budgets. Football uniforms, parking permits. Then, one sentence, discussion regarding maintaining academic culture within advanced placement programs. Academic culture, there it was again, different wording, same idea. Sarah leaned closer to the screen. They keep changing the words, but never the meaning. The more we looked, the more impossible it became to ignore. Every few years, the language changed. Cultural compatibility, academic culture. Community compatibility, student fit, learning environment, different labels, one invisible filter. Nobody ever explained how it worked, because if they explained it, people might question it. One afternoon, an elderly librarian named Mrs. Carter quietly approached us. "You two have been spending a lot of time down here." Neither of us answered. She looked at the copies on the table. Instead of getting angry, she sighed. I wondered when someone would finally notice. Sarah and I looked at each other. "You know about this?" Mrs. Carter nodded. "I've worked here 33 years. I've watched principals come and go. I've watched words change, but the students denied opportunities. They never changed. Why didn't anyone say anything?" She smiled sadly. "Because speaking up has consequences." Before leaving, she handed me a small note. Written on it was just one name, Robert Henderson. "Who's that?" I asked. "The former principal. He retired 8 years ago. If anyone knows where this rule started, it's him." She walked away before we could ask another question. Sarah stared at the note. "You realize what this means?" I nodded. "We finally have a lead." But neither of us knew. That meeting, Robert Henderson would uncover something far bigger than either of us imagined. Something that had been quietly shaping Jefferson High for nearly 20 years. The name on Mrs. Carter's note stayed in my head all weekend. Robert Henderson, former principal, retired. The man who, according to her, knew where the community compatibility rule had really come from. Saturday morning, Sarah found an old alumni newsletter online. At the bottom was a short article about Henderson's retirement. It mentioned he now volunteered at a small historical museum about 30 minutes outside Dallas. We looked at each other. "We're going." The museum was quiet. Old farming equipment sat outside, and inside were displays about the town's history. Near the back, an elderly man was carefully polishing a glass display case. His name tag read, "Robert Henderson, volunteer." Sarah walked up first. "Excuse me, Mr. Henderson," he smiled politely. "That's me. My name is Sarah, and this is Marcus. We're students from Jefferson High." The smile disappeared. "Jefferson?" He looked at us for several seconds. "I haven't heard that name in years." I took a deep breath. "We wanted to ask about something called community compatibility." His hand stopped moving. For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, he whispered, "Who told you that name?" "We found it in the student handbook." His face turned pale. "I thought they removed it." "They only changed the wording," Sarah replied. "He closed the museum early that afternoon, then invited us to a small diner across the street. For nearly 10 minutes, none of us touched our food. Finally, Henderson spoke. "I've carried this guilt for almost 20 years. My heart started pounding. I wasn't the one who created the policy, but I signed it." He explained that around 2003, the school district had become obsessed with rankings. Higher AP scores meant better state recognition. Better recognition meant more funding. One district administrator suggested a selection process to keep AP pass rates as high as possible. Officially, it had nothing to do with race. Unofficially, some administrators believed students from certain neighborhoods were less likely to succeed. Those neighborhoods happened to be mostly Black and Hispanic. So instead of saying race, I said quietly, they used different words. Henderson nodded. Culture, fit, compatibility, academic environment. The language changed every few years, but the outcome stayed the same. Sarah asked the question neither of us wanted to. "Did anyone object?" Henderson looked down. "A few teachers. They were ignored. One resigned. Another transferred, and everyone else learned to stay quiet." Then he reached into his briefcase. "I've kept something all these years." He placed a worn manila folder on the table. Inside were copies of district memos. One sentence made my stomach drop. "Maintain academic consistency through selective placement while avoiding language that may create legal concerns." I read it twice. Then a third time, "Avoid language that may create legal concerns." They actually knew. Sarah looked horrified. "This wasn't an accident." "No," Henderson said, "it was deliberate." As we prepared to leave, Henderson grabbed my arm. "Marcus, if you decide to expose this, they'll deny everything. They'll say you're misunderstanding the policy. They'll call it coincidence. They'll attack your character, because that's easier than admitting the truth." I nodded. "I know," he shook his head. "No, you don't. Monday morning, Sarah scanned every document Henderson had given us. We saved copies on 3 different flash drives, one in my backpack, one at Sarah's house, one in cloud storage. If someone makes these disappear, Sarah said, he'll have to erase the internet too. For the first time, we weren't chasing rumors anymore. We had evidence, real evidence, but we still needed one final piece. Proof that the policy was still being used today, not just years ago. And none of us realized. That proof was about to walk straight into the guidance office wearing a backpack and carrying a perfect 4 GPA. Monday morning started like any other. Students rushed through the hallways with backpacks slung over one shoulder. Teachers stood outside their classrooms greeting everyone with forced smiles. If you didn't know what Sarah and I had discovered, Jefferson High looked like the perfect school, but once you knew where to look, the cracks were everywhere. 2 days later, during lunch, Diego came running toward us. You guys need to see this. He was out of breath. What happened? I asked. It's Jordan. Jordan Brooks was one of the smartest students in our grade. He had a 4 GPA, a near-perfect SAT practice score. Captain of the debate team, volunteer at the local food bank. Teachers constantly used him as an example of what a model student looked like. If anyone deserved an AP placement, it was Jordan, yet there he was, standing outside the counselor's office with tears in his eyes. I don't understand, he kept saying. My teachers recommended me. My grades are better than the requirements. So why did they reject me? The counselor quietly repeated the same sentence we'd heard before. The placement committee determined that you were not the right fit for the current academic environment. Academic environment, another new phrase, same meaning. Jordan stared at the paper in disbelief. So my grades don't matter, I'm sorry, those are the committee's findings. Sarah looked at me. This is it. What? This isn't a story from 20 years ago anymore. It's happening right now. After school we met Jordan at a nearby coffee shop. At first he didn't want to talk. He thought maybe he'd done something wrong. Maybe he wasn't good enough. That broke my heart. Because I'd heard those exact words before, from Diego's cousin, from other students. The system didn't just reject people. It convinced them the rejection was their own fault. I pulled Henderson's memo from my backpack. I didn't let Jordan read everything, just one sentence. Avoid language that may create legal concerns. Jordan looked up slowly. They knew, we think so. He sat there silently for almost a minute, then he whispered, I want to help. Over the next week our group grew. Jordan joined us, then another student named Emily, then Carlos, then Jasmine. Every one of them had nearly identical stories. Excellent grades, strong recommendations, rejected. Every rejection letter used slightly different wording. Not the right learning environment. Limited placement availability. Committee discretion. Community compatibility. Different words, same result. Sarah spread every letter across her dining room table. There were 12 of them. Every rejected student was either black or Hispanic. Not a single white student with similar qualifications had received the same explanation. That couldn't be coincidence anymore. Sarah's dad was an accountant. He loved spreadsheets. When he saw what we were working on, he quietly helped organize the data. No opinions, just numbers, student GPAs, test scores, teacher recommendations, AP acceptance rates, neighborhoods, race. The spreadsheet didn't lie. Students with lower grades were being accepted over students with higher grades. Again and again and again. When we finished analyzing everything, the room fell completely silent. Jordan finally asked the question nobody wanted to answer. So, who do we tell? We considered going straight to the principal, but Henderson's warning echoed in my mind. They'll deny everything. Instead, Sarah suggested something smarter. The school board. Every month, the district held a public meeting where citizens could speak. Anyone, parents, students, teachers, each person got exactly 3 minutes. 3 minutes to expose a system that had existed for nearly 20 years. It sounded impossible. The week before the meeting, something strange happened. When I opened my locker, every copy of our notes was gone, not my textbooks. Not my backpack, just the folder containing our investigation. Someone had opened my locker. I ran straight to Sarah. The folder's gone. She didn't panic. Instead, she smiled. Good thing we made backups. Cloud storage, flash drives. Printed copies, everything was safe. But one thing became crystal clear. Someone knew we were asking questions, and they wanted us to stop. That Friday afternoon, Mrs. Carter found us in the library. Without saying a word, she placed a small envelope on the table. Inside was a handwritten note. It contained only one sentence. They're discussing you in tomorrow's administrative meeting. No name, no signature, nothing else. Sarah looked at me. They're scared. I wasn't so sure. Scared people make mistakes. Powerful people make plans, and I had a feeling. Jefferson High's administrators were about to make theirs. Saturday night, my mom sat across from me at the kitchen table. She had read every document, every rejection letter, every statistic. Finally, she spoke. Marcus, if you go through with this, you need to understand something. What? This won't just affect the school, it could affect your future, scholarships, college admissions, recommendations. They may not be able to punish you officially, but people have long memories. I stared at the stack of papers. Then I thought about Jordan, about Diego's cousin, about every student who'd walked away believing they simply weren't smart enough. I looked back at my mom. If nobody says anything, they'll keep doing it. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I know, and whatever happens, I'm proud of you. The school board meeting was only 4 days away. We had evidence, witnesses, statistics, historical documents, and one chance to tell the truth, what none of us knew was that someone else had already learned about our presentation, and before we could speak, they were going to try everything they could to silence us. The school board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock p.m. By 5:30, the room was already packed. Parents, teachers, students, local residents. Most of them had no idea why so many Jefferson High students had shown up together. They were about to find out. Sarah checked her backpack one last time. Flash drive, got it. Printed copies, 3 sets, backup, cloud. Jordan smiled nervously. If this goes badly, I guess we're making history. None of us laughed. When the meeting began, the board worked through the usual agenda. Budget updates, transportation contracts, athletic renovations. It felt like forever. Finally, the board president looked at the list. Next speaker, Marcus Williams. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. I walked to the podium, took a deep breath, and began. My name is Marcus Williams. I'm a junior at Jefferson High. I came here because I believed every student would receive equal opportunities. I no longer believe that's true. The room became completely silent. I explained how I had transferred with excellent grades, how I had been denied AP placement, how I kept hearing the phrase, community compatibility. Then I held up the old student handbook. This policy used to be called cultural compatibility. A few people in the audience looked confused, others leaned forward. I continued. We discovered older district records showing the wording changed several times, but the outcome never changed. Sarah connected a laptop to the projector. A graph appeared on the screen. It showed AP enrollment by demographic group, no accusations, just numbers. The room began whispering, then Jordan walked forward. My name is Jordan Brooks. I have a 4 GPA. My teachers recommended me. I was still denied. He held up his rejection letter. They told me I wasn't the right fit. His voice cracked. For weeks, I thought maybe I wasn't smart enough. Several parents lowered their heads. One teacher quietly wiped away tears. Sarah spoke next. She calmly explained the documents we'd found. Old handbooks, archived meeting agendas, the memo from Robert Henderson. She never raised her voice. She simply presented evidence, 1 page at a time. Then she displayed the sentence that changed everything. Maintain academic consistency through selective placement while avoiding language that may create legal concerns. A loud gasp spread across the room. One board member immediately leaned toward the district attorney seated beside him. Another began flipping through the printed packet we'd handed out. The superintendent stood up. I object. These documents have not been verified. Sarah calmly answered. You're welcome to verify them. We've already submitted copies to multiple news organizations and an attorney. The superintendent froze. That wasn't true, at least not yet, but he didn't know that for the first time all evening. He looked nervous. Then something unexpected happened. A woman in the back stood up. She introduced herself as an English teacher. I've worked here for 14 years. I've watched qualified students get rejected over and over. I stayed quiet because I was afraid. I'm not afraid anymore. Another teacher stood, then another within minutes. 7 current and former teachers publicly admitted they had questioned the placement system for years. The board members looked stunned. This was no longer one student's complaint. It had become a pattern. The meeting ended without a decision. But the story didn't end there. The very next morning, a local television station aired a report titled, Students Question Hidden AP Placement Policy at Jefferson High. By lunchtime, the story had spread across social media. Parents demanded answers. Former students began sharing nearly identical experiences online. Some had graduated 10 years earlier, others only months before. The stories all sounded the same. Excellent grades, perfect recommendations, rejected without explanation. 3 days later, the school district announced an independent review. Nobody believed it. Parents wanted an outside investigation. Civil rights organizations contacted several families. An attorney offered to represent students free of charge. More importantly, teachers who had stayed silent for years finally began speaking. Anonymous emails poured in. Meeting notes, old policy drafts, internal messages, each one added another piece to the puzzle. About 2 months later, the district released its findings. The community compatibility language was immediately removed from every handbook. The AP placement committee was dissolved. A completely transparent application process replaced it. Students would now be evaluated only on academic requirements, exactly as it should have been all along. Several administrators retired before the investigation concluded. Others quietly resigned. No one admitted wrongdoing publicly, but the changes spoke for themselves. Jordan reapplied. This time, he was accepted into every AP class he requested. The following year, he graduated near the top of our class. Eventually, he earned a full scholarship to a state university. When he gave his graduation speech, he looked directly toward the faculty section, then said something I'll never forget. Sometimes, the biggest obstacle isn't failing, it's being told you never deserved the opportunity in the first place. The entire stadium stood and applauded. As for me, people often ask if exposing the policy was worth it. The answer isn't simple. Some teachers avoided me afterward. A few classmates called me a troublemaker. College interviews often included questions about the controversy, but I never regretted speaking up, because every year afterward, more students entered AP classes. Students who previously would have been quietly turned away. They never knew my name, and honestly, they didn't need to. Knowing they finally received a fair chance was enough, looking back. The most disturbing part wasn't that the policy existed. It was how ordinary it sounded. No racial slurs, no hateful speeches, no obvious signs, just polite language, professional wording, a harmless phrase. Community compatibility. Sometimes, the most unfair systems don't hide behind locked doors. They hide behind words that seem perfectly reasonable, and that's exactly why they survive for so long. So what was the most racist rule at my school? It wasn't written in bold letters. It wasn't announced over the loudspeaker. It was a quiet sentence, buried at the bottom of a form. One that almost nobody questioned. Until someone finally did. What about your school? Have you ever seen a rule that seemed fair on paper, but treated people differently in real life? Let me know in the comments.